The maid saw the stepfather enter the wife's daughter's room every night, and she turned pale when Mrs. Alice had been the longtime housekeeper for the family of a wealthy middle-aged widow named Karen. Recently, Karen had remarried a man named Edward. They now lived with Karen's daughter from a previous marriage, Lucy, a quiet 14-year-old girl with sorrowful eyes and the habit of drawing alone for hours. Alice had no family of her own. She lived in a small room behind the garden, completely separate from the main house. Her room had only one window, facing Lucy's room on the second floor. Every night, before going to sleep, Alice would read her book, occasionally glancing out the window to make sure the light in Lucy's room was off and the girl was asleep. Until one night, exactly at 1 a.m., Alice absent-mindedly looked out the window. She froze. A faint light spilled from Lucy's room through the half-drawn curtain. In the dim light, a tall figure was standing beside the girl's bed. The figure had his back to the window, so Alice couldn't see his face, but she recognized that frame all too well. It was Edward. "That's not possible," Alice murmured, rubbing her eyes. When she opened them again, the light in Lucy's room had gone out. Alice was stunned. She sat down, mind in turmoil, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. Maybe he was just checking if the girl was asleep, or maybe Lucy had a nightmare. Or maybe I saw it wrong. But an unsettling feeling crept into her heart. The next morning, she went about her duties as usual. Edward was sitting in the garden, sipping coffee, as polished and polite as always. "Good morning, Alice," he said, with a flawless smile. "Good morning, Mr. Edward," Alice replied, swallowing the lump in her throat. Lucy was drawing under the wisteria trellis. She didn't look at anyone, her hand gripping the pencil so tightly it seemed about to snap. Alice approached. "What are you drawing, Lucy?" The girl didn't look up. "Just dreams," she muttered. The drawing showed a dark room, with a shadow standing at the door. Second night. Alice waited. At 1:10 a.m., Lucy's room lit up again. Edward walked in clearer this time than the night before. "Dear God," Alice whispered, her hand trembling. She didn't dare take her eyes off the window. Then the light went out again. The next morning, she sought out Karen. "Ma'am," Alice said, trying to keep her voice steady, "there's something I'm not sure I should say." Karen was making tea. "What is it?" Alice hesitated, then said, These past few nights, I've seen Mr. Edward, going into Lucy's room late at night." Karen stopped what she was doing. "Late at night? You saw this?" "Yes, from my window." Karen frowned, her tone rising slightly. "Edward cares deeply for Lucy. He treats her like his own daughter. I'm sure he's just checking to see if she's covered up." Alice nodded slightly but couldn't hide the doubt in her eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Karen's voice grew cold. "I just found it strange, that's all. Don't let your imagination get the better of you, Alice. I know my husband." Alice lowered her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am." After that, Alice said nothing more. But she kept watching. Night 3, night 4, it was the same. At the exact same time, Edward entered Lucy's room. The next morning, the girl avoided Alice as if she feared the housekeeper might know something. One day, while cleaning, Alice ran into Rachel, the retired gardener who still visited occasionally. "Have you noticed anything strange about Lucy lately?" Alice asked. Rachel sighed. "That girl hasn't smiled much since Edward moved in. But don't say too much. Karen's head over heels for him. But what if something's really going on?" Rachel looked at her and said, "If something really is, then she's not likely to believe it." That night, Alice sat by the window for hours, clutching her phone. The urge to do something had never been stronger. But if she said anything again, she might lose her job, be thrown out of the place she had worked at for nearly 20 years. But if she did nothing? That question lodged in her chest like a nail. After many nights of observation, Alice no longer doubted her own eyes. Every night, between 1 and 2 in the morning, Edward quietly entered Lucy's room, disappearing behind the door as if it were a routine. She no longer thought she was being paranoid. A vague terror began to rise in Alice, not just for Lucy, but for herself. She knew that if she acted wrongly, everything could backfire. Edward was too smart, too composed. During the day, he smiled and spoke politely to everyone. Sometimes, he even showed Alice excessive concern that gave her chills, but there was no way to accuse someone of being too polite. One morning, Alice decided to approach Lucy. The girl was sitting on the stone steps in a garden corner, hugging her knees, eyes gazing into the distance. Alice walked over and gently asked, "Are you cold, Lucy? Would you like me to bring you a sweater?" Lucy shook her head, not turning around. Alice sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Have you been sleeping well lately?" Silence. "I've noticed you seem sad. Is there something worrying you, sweetie?" After a long pause, Lucy whispered, as if to herself, "No one would believe me." Alice's whole body trembled. She wanted to ask more, but Lucy stood up and walked away. That day, Alice went to Karen again. "Ma'am," she began, "I think something's wrong with Lucy." Karen frowned. "This again, Alice? I told you to stop overthinking things." "No, this time I'm serious. The girl is frightened, withdrawn, and I've still seen Edward." "Stop." Karen raised a hand. "I won't let you insult my husband over something you imagined. But you're her mother. Don't you see anything unusual in your daughter?" Karen paused for a moment, then replied coldly, "I think Lucy is just going through puberty. Puberty doesn't make a child afraid to look anyone in the eye." Karen snapped, "Alice, I've appreciated you for many years. But if you keep interfering in my family's matters, I'll have to reconsider your position here." Alice stood frozen. Those words struck like a blade, cutting through the years she had devoted to this house. That night, Alice couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, head in her hands, tears falling silently. The next morning, she spoke again with Rachel, the only one who had listened. "Rachel. You didn't sleep again, did you?" Rachel asked, seeing the dark circles under Alice's eyes. "I've seen him go into Lucy's room every night. I told Karen, but she won't believe me. Or, doesn't want to." Rachel sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Some mothers fear the truth more than the consequences. But I can't just leave the girl like that." "Then you have to do something." Alice swallowed her tears and whispered, "I'll try another way." That night, before turning out the lights, Alice secretly placed an old phone in the hallway, near Lucy's door. She set it to record and hid it inside a fake plant pot. She didn't know if it would capture anything, but she knew she had to try. The next morning, retrieving the phone, her hands trembled as she played the recording. There was static at first. Then footsteps, light but distinct. The door creaked open very softly, as if someone was trying not to make a sound. Then a long silence. And then a man's whisper, too low to make out most of it, but a few phrases were clear. "Lucy, shoo, it won't hurt like you think," and then, what sounded like a stifled sob. Alice burst into tears. Without waiting another minute, she walked straight into the living room, where Karen was reading the newspaper. "Karen, please, listen to this," Alice said urgently, holding out her phone. Karen gave her an annoyed look but still took the phone and pressed play. After a few minutes of listening, she shut the phone off. "What are you doing?" I just wanted you to know what's going on. You planted a recording device in my house. You were eavesdropping. Didn't you hear that voice? That's Edward. There's no clear evidence. Just whispers. What are you trying to pull? To save Lucy." Karen jumped up, furious. "Are you jealous of my family? Are you trying to tear us apart?" No, I just believe what I saw. And what I heard. Get out. I'm warning you for the last time. One more step out of line and you won't be living in this house anymore. Alice left the room, her eyes red. Little Lucy was standing by the staircase, hiding behind a stone statue. Her small hands were gripping the railing tightly, lips pressed together. Alice looked up, just catching Lucy's eyes before the girl turned and ran back to her room. That day, while cleaning the storage room, Alice found one of Lucy's drawings slipped out of a folder. It was a picture of a torn-up doll lying inside a dark box, with a tall shadowy figure standing beside it, head turned away. Below the drawing were the scribbled words, "No one believes the doll." Alice clutched the drawing to her chest, unable to hold back her tears. Outside the mansion, the sky was gray. The wind blew through the dead tree branches, making them creak like breaking bones. Alice felt like a part of her was breaking too. That night, before bed, Alice retrieved the audio recording, plugged in her headphones, and listened to it over and over again. Amid the whispers, she clearly heard a line she had missed the first time. "Don't tell anyone, Lucy. This is our secret." Her body went cold. The next morning, she gently knocked on Lucy's door. "Lucy, can I talk to you for a moment?" Silence from inside. "I'm not your mother, I'm not someone who can change everything. But if you ever need someone to listen, I'm here. I'll believe you. Only if you want to talk." After a while, the door opened a crack. Lucy stood there, her eyes unbearably sad. In a barely audible voice, she said, "You should leave. No one will believe you." Then she closed the door again. The next morning, Alice woke with a dull headache. Late September in Boston had begun to feel chilly. She sat quietly by the window, her cup of tea long gone cold. Her eyes were sunken, but in them burned a determination she'd never felt before. Today, she would do what she had been hesitating to do, report to the police. No need for Karen's permission. No need for clearer evidence. All she needed were the sleepless nights, Lucy's grim drawings, and the look in that child's eyes every time she looked at Edward, full of confusion, fear, and resignation. Alice walked into the main house and stood at the living room door, where Karen and Edward were having breakfast. "Ma'am, I'd like to speak with you privately," she said, steadying her voice. Karen put down her spoon and frowned. Edward looked up, wearing his usual polite smile. "What is it, Alice?" Karen asked, annoyed. "It's about Lucy. I think I've been too patient." Edward cut in, "This again, Alice. I thought we made this clear." "You don't get to stop me from speaking," Alice interrupted, her eyes sharp for the first time, locking on him. The air in the room grew thick. Karen stood up from her chair. "What are you doing? Looking for a fight?" "I'm going to the police." "And I have evidence," Alice said, pulling her phone from her pocket and playing the recording. Karen listened for a moment, then snapped, "This again? I told you it's not clear. You're eavesdropping in my house and making accusations." Edward leaned back in his chair and shrugged. "She's just obsessed. Best thing is to give her a few days off to clear her head." Karen's eyes turned cold. "I don't want to escalate this, but if you keep accusing my husband, you will be out of this house." Alice gripped her phone, then placed it on the table. "Then I'll leave. But before I do, I will report this to the police. If none of you are going to protect that child, then I will." Edward smirked and stood. "Without solid proof, they'll just laugh at you." "I'll take my chances," Alice replied, turning and walking out, leaving the two of them frozen in place inside a house that was beautiful on the outside but rotting from within. The local police station wasn't far from the White Oak estate. Alice sat at the desk of Detective Michael Walker, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a sharp, patient gaze. "You said you have evidence?" he asked. Alice nodded and placed her phone on the table. "I can't be sure, but there are footsteps, a door opening, and a clear sentence, "This is our secret." Detective Michael put on his headphones and listened to the recording. When it finished, he took the headphones off and gave a small nod. "We'll send someone to follow up. But, you need to understand, without a statement from the victim or more definitive evidence, we can't make an arrest. But I'm afraid the girl might be harmed again," Alice said, her voice trembling. "We'll follow protocol. Thank you for coming forward." He handed her a receipt acknowledging the report. Alice left, gripping the paper like it was her last strand of hope. That afternoon, police officers arrived at the White Oak estate. 2 plainclothes officers rang the doorbell. Edward answered, calm as ever. "Is there a problem, officers?" he asked. "We received a report and would like to follow up on some concerns regarding the girl, Lucy," one of the officers said. Karen appeared at the door, visibly startled. "Is something wrong with my daughter? We just need a few minutes to talk. With your permission." Lucy was sitting in the living room, drawing. When she saw the police, she jumped, dropping her sketchbook. Edward quickly said, "Alice must have told you something. She has a wild imagination. I only went into Lucy's room a few times because I heard noises old houses often creak in the wind." One officer nodded and jotted down notes. "Have you noticed anything unusual lately, Mrs. Karen?" Karen hesitated. "No. I think everything's fine. Lucy's just a quiet girl. We'd like to speak to the child alone." "No," Edward interrupted sharply. "She's a minor. Her mother should be present." The officer looked at him, then turned to Karen. "Then please come with us." Lucy looked at her mother, her hand trembling slightly. Inside a private room, the officer asked gently, "Lucy, is there anything you'd like to tell me? Has someone made you feel afraid?" Lucy shook her head, eyes cast down. "If something's happened, you can tell us. You won't be in trouble. If anyone has hurt you, just a nod will be enough." Lucy still shook her head. Karen sat beside her, holding her daughter's hand, but her eyes never met hers. When they stepped out of the room, one of the officers sighed and reported to Michael through the radio. "No statement. No evidence. Nothing." Karen fired Alice that very afternoon. "You've crossed the line. I can't trust you anymore," she said firmly. "You'll regret this," Alice replied, quietly packing her belongings. Lucy stood on the staircase, saying nothing. She watched Alice's every step with an empty look in her eyes. As Alice passed through the gate, she turned back one last time. Lucy was still standing there, behind the curtain, like a ghost trapped in her own home. Alice rented a small room in a working-class neighborhood in the southern part of the city. It was cramped and old, but just enough to get by. The first nights after leaving White Oak Estate, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of Lucy appeared, the small shadow swallowed by a house too big and too cold. She wrote a long handwritten letter, signed with her name, and sent it to the high school Lucy attended. The letter detailed everything she had witnessed, along with the audio recording and photos of Lucy's disturbing drawings that Alice had taken before leaving. A week passed. No response. Rachel came by. "How have you been?" the older woman asked, carrying a bag of homemade cookies. "Thank you. I'm okay. Do you think Karen will change her mind?" Alice looked out the window. The pale sunlight cast long shadows on the wall. "No. At least not yet. She's lying to herself." Rachel nodded. "I just hope the girl is safe." "Maybe," Alice whispered, "if someone else speaks up, things will change." Meanwhile, back at White Oak Estate, Karen began to have trouble sleeping. Edward still went into Lucy's room. Lucy still said nothing. But one night, as Karen passed by her daughter's door, she heard a chilling whisper. She froze outside, her hand trembling. She was about to open the door but stopped. This can't be, she told herself. Edward loves Lucy like his own daughter. He's just. Then the creaking of the bed echoed behind the door, as if someone was moving back and forth. Karen stepped back and walked quickly to her room. In her mind, one sentence played over and over: Alice lied to me. Edward is a good man. Lucy is fine. But Lucy's eyes, the way the girl remained silent every time she looked at her mother, clung to Karen like invisible claws. And she knew, somewhere deep inside, the truth was beginning to surface. Time passed after Alice's departure, and the atmosphere at White Oak Estate grew darker. The new housekeepers only came during the day, never staying overnight. None were patient or attached enough to notice the little things: how Lucy flinched at any touch, or how her eyes turned lifeless every time Edward walked into the room. Lucy no longer drew in the garden. She withdrew into herself, kept her room closed, barely spoke, and seemed to have completely lost her ability to trust adults. One early morning in October, Rachel made an unexpected visit. She walked into the familiar garden, carrying a basket of oranges and a bouquet of dried orchids. Karen invited her inside, but Rachel declined, staying beneath the wisteria trellis. "I miss Lucy," she said. "How's she doing lately?" "She's normal. Her grades have dropped a bit, but that's just puberty." Karen forced a smile. Rachel nodded, her sharp gaze drifting to the second-floor window. "I heard Alice moved out. Is she okay?" "I don't know," Karen answered curtly. "She caused too much trouble for my family." Rachel didn't say more, but something quietly shifted inside her. That evening, as Karen passed Lucy's room, she heard the squeaking of a chair. She knocked gently. "Lucy, may I come in?" No response. She opened the door and stepped in. The room was dark, lit only by the soft glow of the night lamp. Lucy sat with her back turned, drawing on the wall across from her. "What are you doing, sweetie?" Karen asked. Lucy didn't reply. Karen stepped closer. On the wall was a rough charcoal drawing of a tall faceless man standing beside a tiny girl with terrified eyes. Karen froze. "Lucy, who drew this?" "I did." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Who is this supposed to be?" "No one." Karen knelt in front of her daughter, trying to meet her eyes. "Lucy, did something happen? You can tell me." Lucy looked up, her eyes red but dry. "I already did." "When?" "I wrote it down." "But you threw it away." Karen was stunned. "You wrote to me?" Lucy got up and walked to her desk. She pulled a crumpled paper from her coat pocket and placed it on the table. In messy black ink, it read, "I told you, but you didn't believe me." Karen stood in shock. "Who did you give this to?" she asked. "Miss Alice. Before she got fired." Karen clutched the note. "Lucy, who made you write this?" Lucy didn't answer. She just climbed back into bed and pulled the blanket over her head. Karen left the room, still holding the paper. She went straight to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of cold water, and sat down, trying to calm herself. On one side, a vague truth, strange drawings, fragmented words, a child's silence. On the other, a gentle, kind husband who had always listened to her, supported her through her loneliness, lifted her from the darkness. But why did Lucy draw like that? Why did she say, "I already told you"? Karen picked up her phone, hesitated, then dialed Rachel. "Rachel, it's me, Karen. I figured. Are you alright?" I'm not sure," she faltered. "I just saw one of Lucy's drawings. It's strange. And she mentioned something she wrote to me." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are you sure you read everything she gave you?" "No. Maybe I overlooked it, or chose not to notice." Karen's voice was hoarse. "I don't mean to judge, Karen. But if something's going on, don't ignore it. A child doesn't draw things like that for no reason. The next morning, Karen searched Lucy's old wardrobe. Inside an old school bag, beneath stacks of books, she found some drawings and a hardcover notebook. The first page bore small handwriting. "No one is allowed to read this except Mom." Her hands trembled as she turned the first few pages. Inside were fragmented diary entries. "Last night he came again. I tried to pretend I was asleep, but my heart was pounding. I was afraid he'd hear it. I knocked on Mom's door for help. But she didn't open. Maybe she loves him more than she believes me. He said if I told anyone, I'd be locked away forever. No one believes me. Miss Alice is the only one who looks at me and sees the nightmare I'm living." A final line, scrawled in shaky writing. "I hate living in this house." Karen fell into a chair, her face pale. The words were like knives, cutting into her chest, exposing every misplaced trust she had made. A mother who hadn't listened. A wife who had trusted the wrong man. Lucy sat in class, staring blankly out the window. The literature teacher was reading The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. The final line echoed through the classroom. "I took the one less traveled by. The color green, the color of hope, of life." But to Lucy, everything was gray. A quiet voice called out, "Lucy." She turned. It was Emma, her quiet deskmate who often paid attention to her. "Are you okay?" Emma asked. Lucy only shook her head. "Do you want me to listen?" Lucy started to shake her head again but then paused. "No one believes me." Emma didn't respond. She simply placed her hand gently on Lucy's wrist. For the first time in weeks, Lucy didn't feel cold. Karen held the notebook in her hands and walked straight to her daughter's room. Lucy was napping, her face buried in the pillow. Karen sat down at the edge of the bed and said softly, "Lucy. I'm sorry." Lucy didn't open her eyes. "I read it. Everything you wrote. I didn't believe you. I ignored the signs." Lucy opened her eyes, looking at her mother, red and weary. "Do you believe me now?" she asked. "Yes. I believe you. And I'll do everything I can to protect you." "What about him?" Lucy's voice trembled. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. I promise." Lucy sat up and clung tightly to her mother. For the first time in months, there was no distance between them. Only the chaotic rhythm of two hearts beating together in a tearful embrace. Karen held the diary in her hand, her eyes staring into space. Rachel called. I read through her entire journal. "I know what I have to do," Karen said, her voice calm but resolute. "You're not doubting anymore?" "No. Lucy deserves to be heard, to be believed. And this time, I'll be the one standing by her for real." Rachel replied gently, "Then do the right thing. There's still time." Karen nodded, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. That afternoon, while Lucy slept in her mother's arms, Karen sat alone in the living room. In front of her were the diary, her daughter's scribbled note, and the audio recording Alice had once handed her. Together, they reflected back at her like a mirror, showing all the times she refused to believe what was plainly in front of her. She picked up her phone and dialed 911, the national emergency number. 911, what is your emergency? A woman's voice answered. My name is Karen Mitchell. I'd like to report a case of abuse involving my daughter. I have evidence and her written diary. The tone on the other end shifted instantly. Please hold, we'll transfer you to the investigative unit. 1 minute later, a firm male voice came on, Detective Michael Walker. Mrs. Karen, is that correct? Can you provide your address and a good time for us to meet with you? White Oak Estate, north suburbs of Boston. This afternoon. As soon as possible. We'll be there within the hour. This time, when the police car pulled up at the estate gate, Karen no longer felt ashamed or helpless. She walked out to open the gate, a file and Lucy's journal in her hands. Detective Michael and a female officer named Lisa entered with serious expressions. "Thank you for calling us. May I ask, is your husband currently at home?" Michael asked. "Yes. But I'd like to speak privately with you first." Karen led them into the study. She sat down and laid out the evidence. "This is my daughter's diary. There are multiple entries describing emotional and physical abuse. This is the audio recording captured by a former housekeeper. And these are some of Lucy's drawings." Lisa opened the journal and flipped through the pages. She frowned as she read entries like, "He said no one would believe me," and "Every time the lights go out, it hurts so bad." Michael listened intently to the audio recording. When he heard the whispered line asterisk, "This is our secret," asterisk, he removed the headphones and looked at Karen. "Do you understand this means we'll have to bring Mr. Edward in for questioning today?" "I understand. And I'm ready," Karen replied, her voice firm. "What about Lucy? Will she be willing to speak with a psychologist?" Lisa asked. "She used to say no one believed her. But today, I think she believes me." Michael nodded. "We'll send someone to speak with her this afternoon. But first, I need to talk to Edward." Edward was reading the newspaper in the living room when he heard the knock. Seeing Michael and Lisa enter with Karen, he hesitated for a moment, then quickly put on his usual calm expression. "Is something going on?" he asked, pouring himself more wine. Michael flashed his badge. "We're with the Child Protection Investigation Bureau. We've received a report and evidence regarding child abuse. We need you to come with us to headquarters for questioning." Edward set down his glass and scoffed. "Abuse? Who made this accusation?" "Karen, are you serious?" Karen didn't respond. She stood silently behind the officers. "You have the right to remain silent, and the right to an attorney. Anything you say can be used against you in court," Lisa recited clearly. Edward sprang to his feet. "This is insane. I didn't do anything. That stuff's just made up. I'm her husband. And that girl has psychological issues." Michael nodded to Lisa. They stepped forward to handcuff him. Edward resisted, yelling, "I'm being framed. It's the kid. She hates me because I wouldn't let her use the phone." Karen closed her eyes, her hands clenched tightly. Lucy was standing at the staircase. She watched as the police led Edward outside, not crying, not speaking. But when her mother approached, Lucy wrapped her arms tightly around her. "Is he really gone, Mom?" "Yes. No one will hurt you ever again." Lucy collapsed into her mother's shoulder, crying like a child, not with fear this time, but with relief. At the police station, Edward was held for 48 hours under investigation. His attorney, a man named Richard Martin, arrived and demanded his release. Michael slammed his hand on the table. "He's not leaving until we're done questioning him." "No statement from the victim. What exactly are you holding him for?" Richard challenged. Michael calmly opened his laptop, played the recording, and handed over a copy of the journal. The attorney's face turned pale. That evening, Lisa returned to the estate with a young psychologist named Mary. She spoke with Lucy in her bedroom while Karen waited outside. An hour later, Mary emerged and nodded. She started to open up. It's a long road ahead, but at least now she knows she's not alone. Karen asked with a trembling voice, "Did she say anything specific?" "She said he came every night, did horrible things, forced her to keep it a secret, and once threatened to kill her mother if she told anyone." Karen collapsed onto a chair, burying her face in her hands. Rachel arrived just then, carrying a pot of hot soup. "Rachel," Karen choked out. I didn't protect her in time." Rachel placed a hand on her friend's shoulder and spoke gently, What matters is that now you are. The media hadn't caught wind of the story yet. But inside law enforcement circles, the case had begun to draw attention. A stepfather from a respectable middle-class background, accused of long-term abuse of his stepdaughter, exposed by a fired housekeeper dismissed for being overly suspicious. A young reporter from the Boston Globe, named Stephen Carter, heard about the case through a friend at the police department. He quietly began gathering information. Something about the story felt deeply wrong. And worthy of exposure. Lucy was granted a 3-day break from school. During that time, Mary visited each morning for therapy sessions. Karen also began writing her own journal, documenting every change in her daughter's expression and every word spoken, determined never to overlook anything again. In the evenings, they drew together. Lucy started sketching flowers, skies, and light. But in the corner of each page, there was still a shadow, smaller, fainter now. "Mom," Lucy said one evening. "I'm still scared." "You're allowed to be scared," Karen replied, holding her close. "But you'll never have to be scared alone again." Light rain began to fall as Karen walked Mary to the door. Lucy had just finished her 3rd therapy session. Before stepping into her car, Mary turned to Karen and said, "Lucy is beginning to heal. But a mother's guilt is something that also needs healing. You're not alone." Karen said nothing. She gave a slight nod, her heart still heavy as stone. Returning inside, she stopped at the hallway leading to the garden, the path Alice used to take so often. Her eyes drifted to the small side door that hadn't been opened in a long time. It led to Alice's old room. Karen walked over and slid the rusted key into the lock. The door creaked open, dust covering every surface. The room remained exactly as Alice had left it, the beige blanket folded neatly, the old tea set still on the table, and a small picture frame holding the photo of a middle-aged man, Alice's father, Karen assumed. Karen sat on the bed, waves of guilt rising in her chest. She remembered the years Alice had cared for Lucy while Karen was busy at work, when her late husband was still alive, back when life was still peaceful and untouched by the shadow that would one day be named Edward. On the table, there was a forgotten piece of paper tucked between the pages of an old calendar. "If one day I'm wrong, please forgive me. But if I'm right, please protect Lucy." Karen clenched the note in her hand as tears began to fall without warning. That night, Karen sat down to write a letter. Not an email, not a text. She chose a piece of stationery, and in delicate handwriting she hadn't used in years, wrote, "Alice. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I've read everything Lucy wrote. I trusted the wrong person and pushed away the only one who truly saw everything. If possible, please come back, just once, so I can thank you. Karen." She folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and called Rachel. Rachel answered with a slightly surprised tone, "Karen. I have a letter. Would you mind bringing it to Alice for me?" Rachel was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I will. But you need to see her again. You owe her that much." "I know," Karen whispered. Alice was living in a working-class neighborhood in South Boston, renting a small room on the 3rd floor of a walk-up. Since leaving the estate, she had lived like a shadow, working hourly jobs for a few families, eating out of takeout containers, reading old newspapers, and occasionally staring out the window toward the north, where White Oak Estate lay hidden behind a line of trees. When Rachel knocked, Alice didn't open the door right away. She assumed it was the gas company or a utility bill collector. "Alice, it's me, Rachel." The door opened. Alice looked just the same, thin, hair in a low bun, wearing a worn-out sweater. "Rachel? Is something wrong? Karen sent you this." Rachel handed her the envelope. Alice stared at it for a long time before opening it. When she finished reading, she sank into a small chair, clutching the letter tightly. Rachel asked softly, "Do you want to say something?" Alice looked up at her, eyes blurred with tears. "I don't know if I have the strength to go back there." Lucy's been waiting for you for a long time. The next day, Alice came. She wore her old coat, a knitted beanie, and worn-down shoes. Her steps were slow, uncertain but determined. Karen stood in the garden, holding Lucy's old scarf in her arms. When she saw Alice, she was speechless. She took a few steps forward, then stopped. Alice stopped too. The two women looked at each other in silence. "Are you doing all right?" Karen asked, her voice trembling. "I'm alive. Enough to see Lucy one more time. Would you like to come inside?" Alice shook her head. "I'm not here to blame anyone. I just want to know, the girl is safe. Lucy still talks about you. I just hope she lives in the light now, not in the darkness adults created. Would you like to see her?" Alice hesitated, then nodded. Karen led her into the living room. Lucy was sitting, drawing, her back turned. When she heard the door open, she turned around. Their eyes met. Lucy dropped her pencil and ran into Alice's arms. "Miss Alice." Alice knelt down and embraced her. "I'm sorry I couldn't stay." "No. You already did so much." Karen stood nearby, hand covering her mouth, tears falling uncontrollably. That afternoon, when Alice left, Karen walked her all the way to the gate. "You're welcome anytime," Karen said, not as a housekeeper but as family. Alice looked at her, calm. "Family isn't about contracts or money. It's about whether we dare to stand with the truth." Karen lowered her head. "I'm learning how to do that." Alice gave a slight nod, then turned to go. No more words were needed. In Lucy's room, a new notebook lay open. On the first page, written in soft handwriting. "Miss Alice came back. And this time, no one can make me keep secrets." Edward was being held at a detention center on the outskirts of Brookline. Inside his cell, he no longer carried the composed demeanor he once wore. He was withdrawn, occasionally erupting in anger at fellow inmates over the bright light or a creak in the night. His lawyer, Richard Martin, came to visit. "The preliminary hearing is coming up. But honestly, Edward, the evidence this time is pretty damning." Edward scoffed. "I never touched the girl. I just talked to her." "Talked to her at 1 a.m. in the dark? Whispering, 'This is our secret'?" Richard replied coldly. Edward was silent. "Her testimony, the diary, the audio recording, the drawings. It's too much to dismiss." Edward gritted his teeth. "That bitch Karen, she turned on me." Richard stood up, looking at him with disdain. "She didn't turn on you. The truth finally did." Although Edward was gone, Lucy's wounds didn't heal so easily. She still startled awake at night, and she often drew images in shades of gray and black, scenes where a small female figure was surrounded by dark, formless shadows. One day, while Karen was making tea, she received a call from Lucy's school. The school nurse's voice was anxious. "Mrs. Mitchell. Please come immediately. Lucy just fainted in class. We have her in the infirmary." Karen dropped the teacup, her heart sinking to her feet. She drove to the school faster than she ever had before. When she arrived, Lucy had regained consciousness, lying pale and sweaty in the nurse's room. The nurse, a woman in her 40s named Caroline, met Karen at the door. "She's showing signs of severe exhaustion, and I'm sorry to say this, but I suspect psychological trauma." When I approached, she recoiled. When I asked about family, she said, "Don't let him know I fainted." Karen raised a trembling hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. "Can I ask, was she ever abused?" Caroline asked softly. Karen nodded. "Her stepfather. But he's in custody now." Caroline gently squeezed her hand. "We'll be filing a report with the school counseling office. She needs close monitoring." That night, Karen went into Lucy's room. The girl was lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She didn't draw. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. "I'm here," Karen said. Lucy didn't respond. "Do you miss Grandma?" The girl blinked once. "I was thinking, maybe you could go to Burlington, Vermont for a while. The air is fresh there. Grandma's always loved you. Maybe it'll help you feel a little lighter." Lucy remained silent. After a while, she turned to her mother and asked in a small voice. "If I go, will you be sad?" "Yes. But if it helps ease your pain, I'll be more happy than sad." Lucy looked at her mother. For the first time, her eyes weren't completely empty. There was something glimmering beneath the surface, faint, like the first flicker of fire in a stormy night. "I don't want anyone opening my door at night anymore. No one will ever do that again." Lucy closed her eyes. Karen stayed by her side, holding her hand, and didn't leave until the girl fell asleep. The next morning, Karen cleaned Lucy's room to prepare for the trip to Burlington, Vermont. While pulling out the bottom drawer of the desk, she discovered something unusual. It was another small notebook, hidden so carefully that she wouldn't have found it without the deep cleaning. She opened it. The first page showed a charcoal drawing, Edward standing in the dark, holding a flashlight pointed directly at Lucy, while the girl stood completely naked, faceless, voiceless. Karen couldn't breathe. The next page was filled with scribbled lines, ink smudged as if blurred by tears. "I dream of him standing by my bed every night. Even after he was arrested, I still hear the door creak open. I want to disappear." But Miss Alice said, "You don't need to disappear. You need to be heard. If anyone ever reads this, please don't forget me." Karen pressed the notebook to her chest. She didn't know what else to do but cry quietly, silently. A single tear dropped onto the cover, blurring part of the drawing. The next day, Karen drove Lucy to South Station. Margaret, Karen's mother, was already waiting on the platform, a thin but sprightly woman with mostly silver hair and sharp eyes. "Lucy," she exclaimed, arms open wide. Lucy approached hesitantly, but after a few seconds, hugged her grandmother tightly. "You'll be okay here. Grandma is strong," Karen whispered. "What about you, Mom?" Lucy asked. "I'll be waiting for you. Every day." Lucy nodded. As the train began to move, Karen stood on the platform, waving. She hadn't even realized tears had already begun to fall. That night, back at the estate, Karen sat down to write in her journal. Today, Lucy left. Not to run away but to find herself again. She has endured too much. And I, her mother, didn't protect her in time. But now I will walk with her on the path to healing. Even if late, I heard her. Even if late, I believed. She closed the journal and blew out the candle. Outside, the wind still howled. But inside her heart, for the first time, there was no storm, only silence beginning to heal. On Monday morning, Karen woke from a dreamless night. She opened Lucy's bedroom door. The little bed was neatly made. A faint scent of lavender oil, which Lucy always used before bed, still lingered in the air. On the desk, Lucy had left a small envelope. On the outside was written, "Only open when you're truly ready, Mom." Karen picked it up, her hands trembling. She set it down, exhaled deeply, then turned around to go to the kitchen. But after a few steps, she returned, peeled back the seal, and pulled out a folded note. "Mom. If you're reading this, it means you were brave enough to face the truth. I once thought I would die. Not the kind of death people can see, but from the inside. I used to want to scream. I wanted to disappear. I thought if I stopped existing, maybe everything would be easier. But then someone believed me. Miss Alice saw what you didn't. And now, so do you. Thank you, for not leaving me behind. Lucy." Karen clutched the letter in her hand, tears falling onto the table. Then she stood up, walked to the phone, and dialed Detective Michael's number. "Hello." His voice was still low and firm, as always. "This is Karen Mitchell. I'd like to turn in my daughter's journals and submit additional evidence. Have you thought this through?" "I haven't just thought about it. I'm ready." An hour later, Michael and Lisa arrived at the estate. Karen had everything prepared: 3 notebooks, a copy of the audio recording, and all of Lucy's drawings that contained disturbing content. Lisa opened one of the journals, reading with increasing heaviness in her eyes. One page read clearly. "He said, 'You're my sweetest secret.'" I felt sick. Michael nodded. "With this full journal, we can file a motion for extended detention and formally charge Edward with psychological abuse and the sexual exploitation of a minor." A week later, Mary and Lisa traveled to Burlington, Vermont to meet with Lucy. In Margaret's small home, the smell of fresh-baked pastries and birdsong created a world completely unlike the shadow of White Oak Estate. Lucy sat on a cushioned chair by the window, holding a cup of warm milk. Lisa entered and sat across from her, her expression gentler than ever. "You know we're here to help you, right?" Lisa began. Lucy nodded. "No one can force you to say anything. But if you want to, if you're ready, your voice could help other children. Children who might be suffering just like you once did, but who haven't been believed yet." Lucy looked at Mary. Mary nodded gently, silently saying, "You're not alone." Lucy set down her cup. Slowly, she began to speak. "At first, he just sat next to my bed. He said he was my new dad, and that he just wanted me to feel safe. But his eyes didn't look like a father's." Lisa gently squeezed her hand. "Then he started touching me. My hands, my hair, my shoulders. And little by little, he'd sit on my bed. He put his hands under my shirt, and they didn't stop there." Lucy paused. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't sob. "He said, 'Don't tell anyone. This is what good little girls do so grown-ups will love them more.'" Lisa clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm. "I hated myself. I tried going to sleep early. I locked my door. But he could open every lock. One night, I tried to scream, and he said, 'If you scream, your mom will die of shame.'" Mary wrapped her arms around Lucy from behind. Lisa nodded. "With your permission, we'll record this statement. And you've done the bravest thing anyone could do." Lucy asked softly, "Will he go to jail?" "Not just jail. He will face the full consequences." A week later, Karen received a call from the court's attorney. Edward was officially indicted on 3 serious charges. The case would proceed to a public trial. In the jail cell, Edward no longer wore his smirk. He slammed his fist on the table when he heard the news. "She's lying. She made it all up to get back at me." Richard, his lawyer, threw the file onto the table. "Enough. I can't defend you if you won't cooperate. The whole world is against me." Edward roared. Richard shook his head, cold and sharp, "No. The whole world is finally listening to a child who was believed for the first time." On the morning of the preliminary hearing, the Boston air was bitterly cold. Karen wore a black coat, clutching the wool scarf Lucy had once knitted. She arrived with Lisa, Mary, and Lucy's victim's advocate attorney. The courtroom was closed to the public, as the victim was a minor. But the press had already begun reporting on the case as a tragic example of how trust within families can fail. Edward was led in. His eyes were hollow, worn from within. Facing him was the woman who had once loved him, now silent and resolute, like a sentence already delivered. The judge read the charges. Child sexual abuse. Invasion of privacy. Severe psychological harm. Edward tried to speak in protest, but his words were like wind against a wall of truth. Lisa stood to represent Lucy. The victim is not present for health reasons. But her complete diaries, the audio recording, her drawings, and her corroborated statement have been submitted. We ask for the maximum sentence to protect other children. Edward's defense attorney offered little rebuttal. There was nothing left to counter the mountain of evidence. Karen said just one thing before leaving the courtroom. "I should have seen it earlier. But better late than never." The hearing ended with the judgment Karen had long hoped for, even if belated. Edward was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the abuse of a minor, violation of privacy, and severe psychological harm. With overwhelming evidence and Lucy's testimony confirmed by psychological experts, the court rejected all of Edward's denials. On the day of sentencing, Karen sat still in the courtroom, hands clenched tightly together. When the judge struck the gavel, she didn't cry, didn't sigh. She simply closed her eyes gently, as if the last rusted latch on a long-locked door had finally been released. In Burlington, Vermont, winter was fast approaching. Lucy lived with Grandma Margaret in a small house near the town square. Every morning, she went to the market with her grandmother, tended to the lavender pots on the porch, and in the evenings, they read books aloud to each other. Mary continued visiting once a week. She closely observed every small change in Lucy's emotional state. By the end of the first month, she smiled when she saw Lucy clean up her study corner by herself and begin coloring discarded drawings again, this time in sky blue and pale yellow. "Are you dreaming of something?" Mary asked one morning, under soft sunshine. Lucy hesitated, then said, "I think, one day, I'll draw myself. But it'll be a version of me that isn't hidden anymore." A month after the trial, Karen knocked on the door of Alice's small apartment, not as a former employer, but as someone who knew she owed a profound thank you. Alice opened the door. She had known Karen would come but didn't know what to say when they stood face to face. "How are you?" Karen asked. "Fine," Alice replied calmly. I want to thank you. Without you, I wouldn't have seen anything." "And Lucy?" "Lucy is the one who endured it," Alice cut in. "I was just the one who stayed close." Karen nodded and stepped in, sitting down on the wooden chair beside the small dining table. "I came to ask, would you like to return to the estate? Not to work, but as family." Alice was silent for a moment, then shook her head. "No. I have a job here. I clean at a nearby school. Watching the children laugh every day, that's enough for me." Karen bowed her head. "Then, at least, let me give you a hug." Alice stepped forward and opened her arms. No words were needed. She had already forgiven. On December 25, Karen received a letter. No return address, but she recognized the handwriting instantly. She opened it. It was a handwritten letter from Lucy. "Mom, today is Christmas. It's colder here in Burlington than in Boston. But I feel warm. I think about you every day. I remember the night you held my hand at the hospital. I remember when you looked straight into my eyes and said, 'No one will ever open your door again.' You kept your word. I'm still healing. But Mom, guess what? I laughed. Truly laughed for the first time in a long while. I want to thank you. And Miss Alice too. You said she was the first to believe me. But I think, she was the first to really see me. Because of that, I'm still here. Still breathing. Still alive. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Miss Alice. I'll keep drawing. And every day, there'll be more light. Lucy." Karen set the letter on the table, overwhelmed and grateful. By the end of summer, Karen opened a small cafe on the corner near Lucy's old school. The cafe was called Light. Alice came by to help every morning. Rachel delivered baked goods regularly. And on one corner wall, there was a special display frame showcasing Lucy's artwork, under the theme. I was seen. I was believed. I was loved. They didn't need a sign saying, Community Cafe. Because anyone who walked through that door, if they needed to speak, would be heard. This story is a powerful reminder that the silence of a child should never be dismissed. Adults have the responsibility to listen, to observe, and to believe when something feels off. Sometimes, it's the outsider who sees the truth most clearly, while those closest remain blind due to misplaced trust. Justice may come late, but courage and genuine love always carry the power to heal. Never let a child carry pain alone. Be the one who stands with them.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.